Hello and welcome everyone. I am James Milan and this is our coverage of the 2018 elections. We are here today with one of the candidates, the incumbent for state representative from the 23rd Middlesex District, which, as you know, comprises Arlington and precincts in West Medford. And we're talking to our state rep, Sean Garballey, today. Sean, thanks as always for being here.
Thank you, James.
Appreciate it. I'll get right into the questions.
Great.
The first one is, what are the 2 or 3 biggest issues facing the 23rd Middlesex District? And again, I asked for 2 or 3 because I don't want a laundry list, right? And what policy priorities or initiatives would you support to address those? And as important as anything else, if you can be as specific as possible about how you would pay for them or how they would be paid for.
Great. Thank you very much. Well, the biggest issues facing this district are the ones that I have spent many years working on and reaching progress in many of those areas. One of them is in the area of transportation. We just saw over the weekend the Alewife parking garage was closed because a piece of concrete landed on a car, causing damage and certainly uprooting the quality of life of the thousands of commuters that go to Alewife Station every day to head into Boston. So public transportation is one of the biggest issues. I chair the MBTA caucus. I've been working on the issues of funding, adequate funding, progressive funding, but also maintenance and making sure that the old cars that we used to have are replaced by new cars that aren't going to get stuck. And finally, that we address that $5 billion debt from the big dig that was placed on the MBTA. Every dollar that comes into the T, 35 cents of it automatically goes to debt service. I have a piece of legislation that would assume the debt off the MBTA and put it on the books of the Commonwealth and force the Commonwealth to pay it down. To me, that is one of the most important things that we can do and one of the most important things we should do. And that's what I've been fighting for as your state representative, and that's one of the priorities I'll continue if elected in the primary on September 4th. The second big issue is education funding. We are not adequately funding our public schools. I filed with the number of legislators, there were 10 of us, that said, what is happening with school funding? And it was called the Foundation Budget Review Commission. We filed the bill to set up the commission, which we did 5 years ago. What the commission found was that we are not funding public schools in Massachusetts, all 351 schools and systems across the state, adequately. So the commission came out with a series of recommendations around increasing state support for education, K through 12, in the areas of special education, English language learners, healthcare, special education, there were 4 key components. This past budget, I filed with 81 of my colleagues. I was the lead sponsor of funding the recommendations from the Foundation Budget Review Commission, and we're working to try to get this passed. Obviously, I was hoping the funding would come from the millionaire's tax. The Supreme Court has struck it down, so we're trying to find a way to fund it. We have $1 billion in excess revenue. In my opinion, schools are a priority. And so the funding needs to be a priority of the legislature, and that's what I've been working so hard to do. The third piece, obviously, is housing, and trying to make sure that Arlington and Medford remain affordable places to live. A lot of that comes to subsidized housing and different things like that that I've been fighting and leading the way for in the House of Representatives.
Okay, thanks. So what is it about your own background and experience, and here I'm talking both personal as well as professional, that makes you most qualified to, in your case, continue to represent the interests of the 23rd District?
Great. I've lived here all my life. I'm a lifelong Arlingtonian. I've spent more of my time in West Medford sometimes than I do in Arlington, but I went through the public schools. I was elected early on as a town meeting member, served on town meeting, ran and got elected to the Arlington School Committee, served 3 years on the Arlington School Committee as the budget chairman and as the vice chairman of the committee, and was elected to the House of Representatives in that elected capacity. It is great to have different perspectives. I think that's something that's so important to any government, any type of governmental body, right? We need new perspectives on a school committee. We need new perspectives on the Board of Selectmen or the City Council in the case of Medford. But right now, our representative is a champion on the issues that we care about, someone like myself who's leading the effort on many of the issues we care about, not just a supporter, but a champion. I've drafted, I file legislation, and I'm able to work collectively as a coalition builder in getting them through. In these uncertain times with Donald Trump's administration, with a Republican governor, we need legislators who are going to be champions, not just lip service, not just vote the right way, but actually fight for the values we hold dear in Arlington. And that's the kind of state representative I've been. Every constituent has my cell phone number. They're on my email list. I have office hours once a week. I'm in local cafes across this town and across the city of Medford. We have a champion in the state legislature advocating for our values and for the families of the 23rd Middlesex District. And now is not the time to change that perspective because I have worked extremely hard in building coalitions within state government. I have a record of doing that among all 199 other legislators in the State House, but also constituents in Arlington and Medford. I work with thousands and thousands of constituents each session to get legislation passed and to advocate for the people of the 23rd Middlesex District. In times like these, as I talked about earlier, it's not the right time to change horses, if you will, midstream, because we need a champion. And I've been that champion. And with a new state senator, with a relatively new state representative in the other portion of Arlington, Arlington can't afford not to have a voice at the State House that is effective. I've been that voice, I've been that champion, and I'm hoping to continue that.
Okay, thanks very much. So for this question, there were any number of issues, you've mentioned several already, that we could burrow a little bit deeper down into, but I've picked one, and it's going to be a familiar one for you. Here in Arlington, we will soon need to approve an override to deal with our structural deficit. And while this is fiscally a well-managed town, the level of state aid that Arlington receives really continues to lag behind the growth in expenses for education, infrastructure, other vital parts of the local economy. So, though we understand that there are no easy solutions, residents are eager to know if you have any specific ideas about how to increase state aid for Arlington.
Well, that has been my number one priority. Throughout my time in the legislature, I have worked extremely hard in trying to invest more state appropriation as a member of the Ways and Means Committee into Chapter 70 for education in Arlington Medford, into unrestricted general government aid to everything else, into circuit breaker for special education cost, in McKinney-Vento. And we have increased. Our local aid since when I started has gone up about 20%. Obviously, the costs have risen as well as the increase we have received in local aid. So my top priority as a legislator has been to increase that local aid. And one of the reasons in the last budget debate, I filed the amendment to fully fund the Foundation Budget Review Commission, and it would bring close to $2 billion in revenue to cities and towns across the Commonwealth for the purposes of education. That's why I did that, because Arlington desperately needs those funds, especially for Arlington in the area of healthcare costs and special education costs. Across the Commonwealth, you would also add low-income students and English language learners. But by investing those dollars into education, right, high tide lifts all boats, and that's what we're trying to focus on. We're not trying to pit winners against losers, right, as the local aid formula currently does. We want to adequately invest in local aid so that all 351 cities and towns have the necessary monetary resources to deliver services like education, senior services, and other types of local aid. And I've been the lead on trying to come up with actual solutions on how to do that. Funding the Foundation Budget Review Commission is just one example, but also being the main filer I built a coalition of 82 legislators who signed on to that budget amendment to get it through, to work to get it through. And we did pass some health care reimbursement increases that's going to directly impact for the benefit of Arlington and for Medford. The other aspect is the Supreme Court shot down was what we would call the millionaire's tax, and that revenue would have gone to education and to transportation. Unfortunately, the Supreme Court shot that down, so the voters won't have a chance to vote on it in November. But I believe, and this is why I think it's so critical, to keep your champion is one of the first things the legislature needs to do in January is have a conversation on revenue. And the most important thing is having a revenue source that is both progressive, meaning that the folks who can afford to pay it are going to pay it, and those who can't afford it won't suffer from the consequences, but also making sure the revenue is adequate. And the adequacy is making sure we address the needs of education in all 351 cities and towns, transportation, and other issues like that.
Okay. So the three questions you've already answered are ones that were posed to, are being posed to the other candidate as well. This one, however, is tailored specifically for you. So over your 10 plus years in office, you have amassed a number of accomplishments that many voters are familiar with and that we've often addressed in our own, in the conversations we've had with you. I'd like to ask you to reflect now on the other side of that coin. So you don't have to answer all of these questions, but something that is related to this. What is it that you haven't been able to do? Or what do you think you need to get better at? Mm-hmm. Or what is something that you would do differently if you could? Tackle any or all of those.
Great. That's a great question. There are a number of bills that I've been able to get passed, but as you said, there are a number of bills I haven't been able to get passed. One of them is, we talked about it earlier, is the debt relief bill. I believe in terms of moving forward towards a 21st century transportation system, it is absolutely essential to get that $5 billion debt off the back of the MBTA onto the Commonwealth and develop a plan to pay it down. I have filed a piece of legislation that is supported by many state representatives and senators that would do that. But I haven't been able to get that passed. And I think one of the reasons is it's a risky proposition. People are concerned about what it will do to our bond rating as a Commonwealth. And I understand that concern. But I'm continuing to have more conversations. We see what happened in Alewife. We see what is happening to our aging infrastructure. Until we deal with that debt, we're going to be in big trouble to really develop a 21st century transportation system. And so one thing I need to do differently is figure out how to get more voices into the fray and come up with a real solution to pay that $5 billion debt down. But until we do, we're not going to be able to adequately do it. I would say the second issue, something that's very, very important to me, is around a bill, and I've been filing it every year for the past 10 years, to allow kids with Down syndrome and autism to be able to go to college and take courses even if they can't pass the MCAS test. For me, it's a human right. But we haven't been able to get it passed. And a lot of it, quite honestly, James, has to do with the special interests on Beacon Hill. And one thing that I have done is I've been very dogged, very aggressive on special interests on Beacon Hill. Whether it's taking on utility companies like Eversource to try to get my 100% renewable energy bill through, whether it's taking on health insurance companies who don't want to provide health insurance coverage, whether it's taking on, you name it, the special lobbyists at the State House who convey their special interests, and I have filed legislation to try to get passed. I haven't been able to get some of those bills passed because of that special interest money. And so one of my goals come January, if I'm fortunate enough to get sworn back in again, is to build a broader coalition, not just 80 representatives, but 140 representatives who can push back on these powerful interests and get some of these important pieces of legislation passed. As you said, I've already done that on a number of items. We need to continue to do it.
Okay, thanks very much. I want to just invite you To wrap up by addressing the camera directly, to speak to your audience, you have 30 seconds to say what you want them to know.
Only one candidate has actual experience in working in government and being able to file legislation, draft legislation, and getting it passed. I ask for your vote on September 4th because I've been your champion for the past 10 years, working with legislators and thousands of constituents in getting things done for you here in Arlington and in Medford. And I would be honored to have that awesome responsibility again for the next session. Thanks so much.
Thank you. And thank you for joining us for this conversation with State Rep Sean Garballey. As he mentioned, the election is on September 4th. Don't forget to vote. Thanks for joining us. We'll see you next time.